Palantir is in a make it or break it situation. All the stars are aligning and everything in the world is just right, which means that everything in the world is pretty fucked up for Palantir to actually rise. The first presentation that Palantir did as a publicly traded company, they were nearly 70% revenue growth for government contracts. In the last presentation that they had, they were only growing 19% revenue for government contracts, with 22% in the United States alone. Those are not good numbers. While US commercial and commercial in general is growing at a staggering pace, the government growth is definitely slowing down. The United States right now is in a very shitty situation where the rest of the world is catching up and even surpassing the United States, especially in the next couple of years, specifically a country called China. China is catching up and spending a shit ton of money on artificial intelligence. The United States is all about the red tape. As China is a communist party, they don't have any red tape. Whatever they say goes. Shyam Sankar, the number 2 of Palantir, was just speaking at a national committee. This is a committee to talk about artificial intelligence in the Department of Defense. Currently, the United States is spending $842 billion on defense. Would you like to take a guess how much of that budget is specifically for artificial intelligence? Go ahead, give me the comments down below. I really want to see if you know the actual spending specifically for artificial intelligence of this massive budget. The actual spending is only $1.8 billion. To give you an understanding as a percentage, that is a 0.2% of the total budget for artificial intelligence specifically. Shyam Sankar was talking in front of the committee and he says that I believe that the defense budget for artificial intelligence specifically should be 5%. Think about that. That would be equivalent to, instead of 1.8 billion of this massive 842 billion, to 42 billion dollars. There is a huge difference and it is absolutely massive. I get laughed on when I say that United States government spending is going to increase and a lot of that money is going to go to Palantir. I say that the sector for government spending is going to increase. It's not going to be 19%, it's not going to be 22% for much longer. How and why? As Shyam Sankar is in front of this committee saying that it is vital that the United States government is going to increase their spending on artificial intelligence, I do believe that the United States is going to increase their spending on artificial intelligence. Bank of America is estimating that by 2026, the total spending for defense is going to be $1 trillion. At a 5% spend for artificial intelligence, that would be $50 billion. Think about the numbers that I just said. That is approximately a 25 to 30x of the current spending. How much of that total spending going into artificial intelligence would go to Palantir? Even if 10% of the 50 billion would go to Palantir, and that is not far-fetched, it would make sense that Palantir, the leading AI company for defense, would actually get a nice round number. 10% I believe would be the minimum, but let's go with 10%. That alone would bring in $5 billion of revenue to Palantir. Just to understand, the total revenue of Palantir was just shy of $2 billion for 2022. If you factor in a 30% CAGR, by 2025, our revenue is going to be around $3.5 billion plus or minus. If we can just get 10% and they increase the budget to 5% for artificial intelligence, we would have surpassed our total revenue as per the analyst at Bank of America. Data is the new bullets, and if data is the new bullets, then Palantir is the motherfucking nuclear bomb of data. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of this video.
Chairman Manchin, Ranking Member Rounds, Senator Schmidt, thank you for the opportunity to discuss one of the most important subjects facing both the Department of Defense and our nation at large, the effective and ethical application and integration of artificial intelligence with our armed services. This past February, I had the opportunity to visit Ukraine and witness the incredible speed with which the Ukrainian forces were able to field, learn, and win with AI on the battlefield. While the cycle of commercial innovation and government adoption can take years in the United States. They were doing it in days in Ukraine. So really, the future has already arrived. It's just not evenly distributed. And in that future, AI rewrites our roadmaps. It changes everything. And we can either choose to accept that disruption and drive that change, or we can get disrupted by defending against it. And because the future is already here, we need to act with speed and conviction. And if I can impart one message today, it's that we are facing a moment in which existing roadmaps and systems are insufficient. We must completely rethink what we are building and how we are building it. Software and AI will shape everything, even toasters, but most certainly tanks. To succeed, we need to cut through the existing ways we organize and procure weapon systems and begin with software and AI first. This will be disruptive and emotional. Many incumbents in government will be affected, and they will feel threatened and dislocated. Many careers that have been built on mature technologies, weapon systems, and platforms will also be affected. Fortunately, with the right leadership, our country is amongst the few that can turn on a dime and do so at scale. Because the alternative should be unthinkable, we must do the right thing, the hard thing here. As we begin this journey, I'd like to offer the subcommittee the following recommendations. First, the only way to overcome the intense emotional barriers to this wholesale reinvention is to adopt and embrace a field to learn to win model. We should field AI to mission users and operational workflows at the earliest possible moment, and then continuously improve these models through iteration with operators in the daily deterrence of our enemies and the defense of the nation. This is the technological equivalent of throwing ourselves off the deep end. And in the case of AI adoption, it's the only way to learn how to swim and win in this critical race. Second, the only way the Department of Defense will be able to employ world-class AI with field to learn to win methods is if it overcomes the current market failures. An entire industry of commercial providers stands ready to support the defense community, but they must often stand idle while the government insists on starting from scratch. America's greatest advantage over its adversaries is its software and its culture of innovation. Even our allies are envious of American technology companies and the prosperity that they have brought to our nation. But America cannot exercise its software advantage unless those who are most adept at providing are able to bring their expertise and innovation to bear on these issues of national importance. For example, if there was a need to use any of the cutting-edge large language models on a secret or top secret network, today we cannot. This is a massive market failure. For a mere 0.1% of the department's budget, we could bring cutting-edge commercial innovation to our warfighters. Today, I can give Avis and AIG more advanced AI than I can bring the Army and the Air Force. If we want to effectively deter those that threaten U.S. interests, we must spend at least 5% of our budget on capabilities that will terrify our adversaries. In the late 60s, 95% of all integrated circuits were sold to the US government. The government was the first and largest customer, and it benefited directly from American innovation and ingenuity. The US should aspire to recreate this dynamic with AI. Finally, these recommendations will only be successful if the United States continues to lead in building a regulatory and ethical framework for the use of responsible AI in the defense context. We cannot cede this leadership to the illiberal value structures of our adversaries. Our allies are certainly watching. This is not an exercise for academics. It is about addressing directly real-world problems in real time. Today, we are at an inflection point. AI will define the success of every commercial and government organization. Its development will define the prosperity of our nation, and its adoption in the department will defend our country. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
And my biggest fear is that what little bit I know about AI, but knowing the capability of AI, having people say something they never said, having the image of a person doing something they never did, having a country declaring war that never happened. All these things, I mean, the stakes are so high in what we're doing, but if we can learn from our mistakes and put those guardrails in now, and you all would know better of how you intend your program to be used or your platform to be used, to tell us what should be there to protect, not just to protect your market, if you will, but protect basically the use of this and the intentions of what it's for. I think we need to do that and think about this deeply before we go further. Dr. Sankar, Mr. Sankar.
Absolutely. I think a lot of what you're getting at is we kind of implicitly all believe or explicitly believe that AI is valuable, but how do you make it viable? It's not viable without trust. And that trust requires a real foundation where you understand the data that went into it. You understand why, to the extent you're not getting behaviors you expected, you're getting those behaviors. And so I think a big part of this approach is, I'd welcome a regulatory approach to this, is also realizing that there's a huge and outsized role for the department to lead by going through it. It's only by red teaming, adopting and red teaming, trying to break it, that we're going to really understand and develop the appropriate, rigorous testing and evaluation framework. I would say the analogy to cybersecurity is great here. You can't just have a blue team effort to protect yourself. You learn as much or more from red teaming it that defines how you defend yourself. So I think these are actually two sides of the same coin, and we should be practicing them together and aggressively.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And look, I really want to thank our witnesses here today for some very good opening statements. And you actually answered a couple of questions that I had in advance, just in the opening statements themselves with regard to the effects on national security and our competitiveness. I want to get into something which is current in the news today, and that is that a group of fairly well-respected AI experts and industry leaders recently signed a letter calling for a pause in AI development, citing a risk to society. I think the greater risk, and I'm looking at this from an American, a U.S. security standpoint, I think the greater risk is taking a pause while our near-peer competitors leap ahead of us in this field. AI will be the determining factor in all future great power competition, and I don't believe that now is the time for the United States to take a break from developing our AI capabilities. My questions to all of you would be, number one, is it even possible to expect that other competitors around the world would consider taking a break? And what could be the impact if we were to try to slow down our AI development while Congress looks at policy issues and the rest of the world continues on? In particular, our near-peer competitors who seem to have a considerably less announced concern with regard to the ethics of this new technology. Mr. Sankar?
Absolutely. I think a pause is what's going to be different in 5 months and 29 days. We need to really think about that, other than ceding the advantage to the adversary. I think the other part of it is, so there's the technological capability that we could become, every 2 days now, there is breakthroughs made that we didn't think was possible. So the pace is breakneck. We're talking about generations of advances. But I do think, to Dr. Matheny's point, actually perhaps the bigger consequence is the nature of the AI. China has already said that these generative models must display socialist characteristics. It must not enable the overthrow of the state. So these sorts of constraints that are being baked in, to the extent that that becomes the standard AI for the world, is highly problematic. And I would double down on the idea that a democratic AI is crucial. Now, we will continue to build these guardrails around this, but I think ceding our nascent advantage here may not be wise. What keeps me up at night is do we have the will? And I think we do, but the issue of AI adoption is really one of willpower. Are we accelerating adoption like our survival depends on it? Because I believe it does. I think you see that in our adversaries. They realize that their survival depends on it, and we should move at pace to do this. You have to, you can't make one leg of the stool long and tall first. That's not a very good stool. And so I would urge us to resist the temptation to say, first, we need the perfect data foundation, then we go on. Actually, it is, if we look at the Project Maven example there, it is the fact that we suddenly had the algorithms that pointed us to the fact that the data was garbage. So these things move together, and we have to simultaneously coordinate the investment and not slice these up into different responsibilities. And it is now the fact that we have these powerful large language models that's telling us that we actually don't have enough GPU capacity in the world. And so, I think the stool analogy is a very good one. Now, to your question here, I would say this idea that we are operational is profound. It is our advantage. We do things everywhere in the world. I would say we definitely collect more data. but we also throw away an enormous amount. Part of my experience has been every place we've shown up in a new operational context, there is data we could be collecting that in a prior generation of software was perceived to be useless because there was no operational decision you could have been making with that data. So it was often thrown on the ground. When new capabilities were introduced, the utility of that data became obvious on its face. And so this is a powerful feedback loop that really feeds into our American culture of innovation, solving problems at the edge with the capabilities we're providing. And I would say the data management efforts are great. There are definitely some policy opportunities that would make it world-class. So how do we all get on the same page here? I think we have to get the incentive structure right around how we share data. So a mandate that all data must be shared because it's actually the government's, I think is great in theory, but in practice, in order to enable all of the folks with various interests to do that, you need a data foundation that gives you true security. How am I labeling this data? How do I control who has access to it? How do I govern the purposes for which they're allowed to use this data? Once I develop trust in how we're governing access to this data platform within the Defense Department, now we can actually share this data.
Thank you. And Dr. Sankar, would you like to add anything with regards to the opportunities that AI provides to this country if we properly implement its use?
I think the opportunities are world-changing. The way for us to maximize that is to align behind them. You know, we have significant growth in our healthcare costs. How do we align behind the application of AI to driving the national outcome that drives patient care and quality? You know, so I think there are a couple places where government leadership, where the issue is not capital, it's customers, and providing the sort of bootstrapping foundational customer to drive the concentration of energy to solve the problem, and to realize where we need policy to help us reorganize the many seams that are between here and realizing the benefit for American citizens.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Schmidt.
If you think about regulation, one of the realities of these AI models is that they're actually brittle. That's the failure condition, that in the sweet spot, they seem magical. They seem more than human-like. And just even one iota outside of the sweet spot, they become moronic. And so if you're trusting the moron, that's a problem. So then how the regulation framework is really about understanding the surface area and red teaming the model. Where is the model going to work? Where is the behavior unexpected? What do I expect of the model makers in terms of continuously testing as they upgrade and develop the model so that it's behaving in accordance to what the model's supposed to do? Those expectations are going to be different in healthcare than they're going to be in defense. But I think that's a generalized way of thinking about where's the risk on a concentrated basis. The second aspect of the tiger's bite is what it means for American prosperity. Technology is supposed to drive increases in productivity. And the kind of basic economic theory here is those increases in productivity lead to increases in our standard of living and wages. Hold tech companies accountable to that. Where are the increases in wages? If I'm deploying this technology to a manufacturing company, the workers should be better off, not displaced. It is actually a choice, and I would say an abandonment of our obligation to the nation to simply say, I have no opinion on how the technology is deployed. Of course, AI is going to replace workers. That is not a foregone conclusion. AI can make those workers more valuable. It can drive up their productivity, and they should capture the growth of wages as a result, concomitantly with the company capturing value in the market from doing so. I think tech companies need to do more here.
I think that as the world turns, if you will, and what's happening around the world and all of the different build-up military might, just got back from Poland and Ukraine, saw what was going on there. I want to talk to you a little bit more about Maven, and we'll get into that after later. My concern truly is this. This is a game changer. They can be developing all the super hypersonic missiles and everything else and all the space and everything else. This changes the game, whether they can deploy it or not. And if we are able to have that information and be able to source that to a point where we have more input and be able to be more accurate on what we're deploying, I think it changes the game for the United States to continue to be the superpower of the world. So I want to thank you all, and we really need your input and help, and look forward for your recommendations. Senator Peters, before you came, we talked about what had happened with, the internet came in 1983, Section 230 came in 1996. We made so many mistakes. We're trying to go back, and we're having a hard time. We want to prevent that from happening. They're going to give us, we asked them to give this committee the recommendations on what we could do to put the guardrails in place that we can be superior in this and make sure that their product or their platforms aren't misused for nefarious situations.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, ranking member. I just coming in your conversation on the disruption for employment and what that's going to mean going forward. And you're right. I'm not like a robot apocalypse guy or anything, thinking that all of our jobs are going to disappear and the robots are going to be in charge. But we know when you talk about disruption, my sense is this is probably more disruptive than anything we've seen. Some people compare this to like the printing press and the steam engine, things of that nature, which were big. But as I think about this, what was different that time is it took a lot of time for that technology to actually get through the system. I mean, you're talking about the Industrial Revolution. It's probably over 150 years, and we're all benefiting from the Industrial Revolution of 150 years. But in that 150 years, we had world wars, the rise of communism and fascism and political discord. This may happen in less than a decade versus 150 years. So the speed of this has us all very concerned. I'm glad you're thinking about this, but we got to try to stay ahead. But I don't know how you can stay ahead because of the rapid pace of what this is going, which is why we're going to need your help going forward. And as the chairman mentioned, we want to make sure that the United States continues to be at the forefront. But part of that are the investments. So I'd just be curious, as from a government perspective right now, what should be our priorities in investing to make sure that we're able to use AI with enhancing our ability to secure our networks and cybersecurity. Maybe each of you kind of give me what you think is one or two priorities for investments that we're not making now, or maybe we should do more, or ones that we should be considering that we're not doing now. Whoever wants to start.
So I'll start there. I'll take a stab at it. I think the key thing is we should be using AI, right? So there's a lot of focus on the models, the foundational capabilities, the infrastructure, developing the AI. But AI is not a standalone capability. It has to be brought to bear on the application. I think one of the real experiences from Maven and certainly in the commercial world is you can't really bolt this on ex post to existing infrastructure. You will find that that's limiting you, and it forces you to reimagine the user interfaces, the software approaches, the actual pane of glass you're using to make decisions. And so I think the long pole in the tent for us, where we are in this AI cycle is getting busy using it. And I think that also informs policymakers on the risks, both on the adversarial sense, but perhaps more importantly, the risks to jobs and how we're going to manage our way through that.
We're getting close to the end of the session, I think. I'm not sure of any other members that are coming in, but I just want to recognize, and Dr. Metheny, I think you hit it on the head with regard to our need and the discussion about a legal immigration system that allows us to bring in talent that benefits our country. Can you imagine a world today if Albert Einstein had not been allowed into our country? The world would be a different place today, and not to the betterment. I want to thank you all, and I want to end with one that I sometimes think that when we have an unclassified session like this, we don't get an opportunity to get into some of the deeper items, but we also sometimes miss the opportunity to perhaps explore a little bit about some of the basics that, just in terms of trying to explain what AI is. And I'd like to offer a scenario, and then briefly I'd like to have you be critical of my analysis, if you would, please, okay? So looking at this, I'm a pilot, and I think about what we have right now with regard to computing capabilities in most of the aircraft today. We have an autopilot, which once a pilot has departed a runway, they basically can set the heading, turn the autopilot on, set the heading, tell it to navigate to a particular point that they've already programmed in, set the altitude, and then lay in an arrival and an approach. And that autopilot will, with very few exceptions, and with no more touching by the human, fly that course. If there's changes along the way, frequencies and so forth, in terms of communication, the pilot will make those modifications so that the monitoring is constantly going on. With AI, it would appear to me that we're not really talking about an autopilot approach anymore. What we're really talking about is having a system that does everything that the human does but in a much more orderly and defined and disciplined way, so that it not only does everything that an autopilot would do, but it also makes the decisions about how to get there in the first place and where it wants to go. Now, having me said that, can you criticize or be critical of my analysis so that folks back home get a better sense of what AI means as opposed to simply talking about very powerful computers? Mr. Sankar, I don't think you've had an opportunity to go first. Let me put you on the spot first, sir.
Well, I think at the limit, your vision is right, but I think you have to earn your way there. If we think about how long it took us with self-driving cars, I think the folks who've done really well there shipped incrementally. It's like we made the car a little bit more autonomous every single day, and at this point, it's quite compelling. They're still, can't do the snow, can't do certain low visibility conditions, but they're going to earn their way there. So as we think about what is this likely to be, today I think these are tools, not agents. They can become agents. That's kind of the journey we're on. But we're not going to get that for free. That's like a lot of hard work that we're going to collectively do between here and there. And I think for a lot of things today, the AI is a median human, which means it's going to be great at replacing a lot of tasks that allow our humans to do things that are cognitively more interesting. The brittleness of the AI means that for new creative things, there's likely going to be an editor role. It's going to take our humans from being doers to managers. And that gives them a huge amount of leverage. In the same way that technology, for all of history, has given us a huge amount of leverage. We sometimes underestimate what it has meant for us to have a palm-sized supercomputer in our pocket, but profound. And I think we will look back and say the changes were just as profound, but perhaps slightly different than we anticipated.
Thank you.